Welcome to the Real Life Podcasts with your hosts, leadership and personal growth author and speaker John C. Donahue and licensed psychotherapist Lou Carfisi. The Real Life Podcast is your weekly dose of motivation, encouragement, and direction to help you live your life at the highest level.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Real Life Podcast. My name is John. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, Mr. Lou Carfisi. How are you doing this afternoon, my friend?
Doing well, sir. Hello, everybody. Good to see you.
We are so glad that you are here. We are the Real Life Podcast. We want to bring you some encouragement, some motivation, and some direction so that you can live your life at the next level. And before we really get into our topic for today, Lou, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about where you come from and what you do?
Okay. I am a licensed psychotherapist. I'm licensed in the state of Georgia. I've had a practice there for quite a while. This is what I do along with my practice. We help people with all kinds of problems, all kinds of different areas of concern. And we do this for you. So just know that. And we thank you for dialing into us.
Absolutely. And I agree. And what I do, I come from johncdonahue.com. I'm a life coach. I write and talk about leadership, personal development, time management, and also deal with relationships and all those things that coaching kind of entails. And I would love to see you over at johncdonahue.com. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter at John C. Donahue. And that's who we are. And if you want to know a little bit more about the Real Life Podcast, you can find us at our website, reallifepodcast.com. And you can find us over on social media, on Facebook at facebook.com/Real Life Podcast, and on Twitter at Real Life Cast. And Lou, how can people contact us if they have a question or a comment?
Well, they could go to questions at reallifepodcast.com, ask your questions, and come and get us. You could also stop at johncdonahue.com and message John directly, or you can message me directly on lifecarecounseling.net.
Excellent. And now we've gotten all the perfunctory stuff out of the way. Let's dig into our topic for the day. And we're talking about emotions. But the specific emotion we're talking about today is optimism. And that's a different type of emotion. I mean, people think of emotions, anger, happiness, joy, those type of things. We don't necessarily think optimism as an emotion.
Well, it is. And it's one of the many emotions that we feel or go through sometimes on a daily basis in our lives. Things annoy us or things make us happy. And, the objective here is to make sense of those emotions, know where they come from, and deal with them in a good, socially acceptable way.
Right. Absolutely. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to talk about this emotion of optimism. And we posed this question: can optimism be good, and can optimism be bad? And that's an interesting thought. And I think that you came up with that thought, Lou. And so how can optimism be good? How can optimism be bad?
Well, we've got a list of cases where optimism can be good or it can be bad. It depends on how you use it. It's a tool.
Right.
If you could make yourself feel, that optimism, or you feel that optimism, there's a good and bad side to it.
Right. Every light side has a dark side. Every good has a negative, it seems. And I guess in this case, optimism probably has a downside as well. So this is in no way, shape, or form an exhaustive list, but these are some ideas that we wanted to come up with. And the first one is an optimism can be good when you first get up in the morning. Now, for some people, this might sound counterintuitive because I'm not necessarily a morning person, but studies show that your willpower is much stronger in the morning because you haven't gone through any of the negative stuff for the day. So I'm assuming that optimism could be pretty strong in the morning too, right?
That's right. And another reason for that, John, is that when we sleep, our brain doesn't really go 100% to sleep. It works on problems that we may have had to deal with during the day. And sometimes we wake up and we feel like, hey, that's the answer. That's what I was thinking about. Sometimes it doesn't come that way at all. It depends on how overwhelmed or underwhelmed you may be the previous day or the previous week.
That's why we say that we want to sleep on something, right? Because our brains can work on it while we're sleeping.
That's right.
And optimism works that same way. It's almost like you get a new dose of optimism at the beginning of the day.
That's right. That's
So
right. There's a lot of basis for that, John.
oh, okay. So what's another way that optimism could be good?
Well, we get up, we go about our day, and sometimes when everything seems to be going our way, it's like that whole yin and yang, the balance of the things in our lives. And sometimes we see, wow, this is great. Everything's going my way. I'm going to go out and I'm going to play golf and be great. And I'm going to do whatever it is that I do during the day. And I'm going to do it as best as I can. And everything's going to happen in a great manner.
Does it seem when everything's going your way, there has to be something about we kind of draw energy? And I don't want to get too new age, but it seems like that when we're really optimistic and everything's going our way and we're really in a good mood, it seems like more good things happen. And then when the opposite is true, nothing's going right, we're really in a crappy mood, even more bad stuff happens to us. Is that a legitimate thing, or does it just seem that way?
No, it's absolutely a legitimate point. Part of the reason is that our attitude and our perception is what drives what we think is going to be a good or a bad day or a good or a bad situation. It reminds me of a long lost relative a long time ago, who every time he moved into a different, development, with a lot of other people in the development, he would go to one and he would just get angry. He said, "This is not going well for me." I said, "I don't like this development. And, I don't like some of the people in here. It's just a nasty place." Well, nobody has a chance in that case, because everybody is in that category that he put them in. And it's the same, works the opposite way. We can say that we move in and we're in a good mood and everything's going our way. And then, everybody's great. These are great people. And it'll be the same place with the same people. It's just our perspective.
Right. And perspective goes a long way. Mm-hmm. We've talked about that on so many different occasions. And your perspective, your outlook on life really has a lot to do with what happens in your day to day. So I think another way that people can be really optimistic is when they start a new job. I mean, I know when I do start a new project, or when I was working for people, when I would go into a new job, it was just everything was roses and everything was awesome and new and fresh. And it had that new job smell. It was so.
Yeah, it does have a new job smell, because you and your employer are in this honeymoon stage of the relationship. So you want it to go as well as possible, as does your boss and your new fellow workers.
Right. Our expectations are high on both ends.
Right.
And we haven't any unmet expectations yet. Mm-hmm. I think we talked about that a couple of shows back.
Yeah. They'll probably hear it again too.
Yes,
some point
it's going to be a recurring theme here on the Real Life Podcast. You just can't get away from unmet expectations and perspective. Those are the two things that we talk about ad nauseum almost. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned being in a relationship. When you first fall in love, or you first have that fall in like with somebody, that is a whole nother level of optimism.
Oh yeah, it definitely is. And it's exciting. If you meet someone and you go on a date maybe the night before and it goes great, and there's a lot of promise in that relationship, you go to bed at night, you're happy, you're like excited, and then you get up in the morning, and then for a minute you don't really remember being happy, and then all of a sudden you remember, hey, I just started a new relationship with this wonderful person. And then it continues to do that because it makes us feel like we have fulfilled one of the needs inside us.
Yeah, because we're built for relationship. And so we feel like we've made a new connection. I think we respond to that. Our body seems to resonate. We kind of hit a different frequency. Man, I'm really sounding new age today. And I know
really she has some weird, wacky music in the back.
I really haven't read the wrong books. But I think that's true. I think our bodies resonate with the fact that we were really built for relationship. And when we get in one and there's all that promise of, good things, I think that we respond to that. And I think our bodies are aware of that, and we respond with happiness and joy. And the stars in the sky never looked as blue and as brilliant, and the sun never shined as bright, and the flowers never smelled as good. So our optimism can be really, really high. That's not a bad thing.
No, it's not necessarily. Sometimes we're just optimistic for no reason at all. So what happens there? Nobody knows, right?
Right.
It could be chemical. It could be situational. It could be whatever. We don't know where that comes from, but sometimes we just feel optimistic.
Right.
And there are some people that feel optimistic all the time.
Right. I talk about it like wiring because, when I was going through some counseling, trying to retool some of the things that I was doing, we talked about, I was just wired a certain way. And sometimes I needed to figure out a way to kind of rewire my thought process. And so I like to talk about it in that respect. Sometimes we're just pre-wired to be a certain way. My wife is very optimistic all the time. That's how she's wired. And we're going to talk a little bit about people like my wife here in just a second. I, on the other hand, am pre-wired to be not optimistic. We're definitely going to get into that in just a sec. So, they say opposites attract. So I can definitely see how she is hardwired for optimism all the time. And it befuddles me sometimes that she's so optimistic about everything.
Yeah, and there's a good and not so good part of that that comes along with the little package of optimism.
Yeah,
because there are cases where it's not so good.
Right, and that's what we're going to start down that list. And again, this is not an exhaustive list. So we're dealing with relationships, and when we fail to see the problems with our relationship, we're optimistic about our relationship in lieu of all the problems. And I don't think that's safe. I think that could lead you down a dangerous.
You can, because what we're doing is we're making something positive that may not be all positive. It's our expectations seeping in and saying, if this isn't going well the way I want it to go, then you know what? I'm just going to close my eyes, and I'm just going to say it's going well, because I don't want it to end. I don't want that special feeling in a relationship to die. Yeah,
when you're dealing with couples, and obviously we're not pry into anybody's relationships, but
no.
on a whole, because you deal with couples counseling, do you see this a lot? And what are some of the problems that living like that can cause for a relationship or somebody in a relationship like that?
I see a lot of people who where one party in the relationship is extremely optimistic, and the other party is more, they'll call it realistic, but it may be pessimism. I don't know. It depends on the certain situation and depends on the people. But when one person is overly optimistic and they keep pushing to get the relationship fixed, and the other person really doesn't have any, they won't want to, they don't want to do that, it causes a problem, and it makes the person who's being optimistic look naive, or on another planet somewhere. And this is the basis for their problems when they come in. So you have to look at that piece and make sure that if you feel good in your relationship, that's great. If there are problems in it, don't necessarily feel bad, fix them, because there isn't anything that can't be fixed.
And that's where somebody like a Lou, or even to some degree myself, can step in and help out. A life coach or a counselor or a therapist can help you with those. That's not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of good, strong strength and will and character when you can go to a third party and help process through those difficulties and make your relationship stronger on the back end, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And you want to take the next one?
Sure. Optimism could be a problem when we always assume goodwill with everyone that we meet and interact with, instead of only those people whom we know that we can trust. And this could be a real world problem if you're always optimistic and you see someone on the side of the road and their car's broken down, and then you immediately think, oh, there's somebody I need to help. And you don't really process through your surroundings. You just pull over to the side of the road. And the reality of the situation becomes they're just faking the car accident so that they could mug you, carjack you, or worse. So that would be one example of that on a large scale.
Yes, it is. Also in business. In business, if you're doing business with somebody or an entity, the last thing you want is emotions inserted into the process of negotiation and figuring out what you're going to do with this relationship that you're trying to start. And when you're naive, and again, I've used that word, but we're going to get to it later. When you're naive, you're really overly optimistic and assuming goodwill, which means that their motives are going to be pure. They're going to be real. And if you do that, you're going to get smacked in the head a lot of times with reality when it hits.
Yeah. And we talked about relationships at work. So go check out that podcast. And we really dig deep into that, about that specific situation. And it's very damaging to a lot of people at work, your boss, you, your coworkers. So that's something that you really need to address. And when you have someone in your life that always assumes goodwill in everybody, and they're always optimistic about your relationships, especially for those people who are not as optimistic or maybe a little bit more real world minded, it's a nice way of saying pessimistic, it could be a challenge because you start to worry about them. And then you know, if you voice those concerns a lot, that can be a drain on the relationship. So it's kind of a hard balancing act. And it's, it could be a real challenge on the relationship.
It really can.
Yeah.
You know, we talked earlier, John, about being optimistic for no reason at all.
Right.
And these next two things could explain it. One of them is when we drink too much coffee.
Explain that.
You get up, you have your coffee, you get nice buzz for your morning so you can get through the shower and all that stuff. You get to work and you have some more coffee. So the more coffee you have, the more optimism you seem to have. And it makes you be steered and your emotions be controlled by a chemical. And you have to recognize, I don't care if you drink coffee, you know, it's fine. I drink it.
Right.
But if you drink way too much, you're chemically altering your mood. And you have to be aware of that. I wouldn't drink like 10 cups of coffee and go into a serious meeting with a boss or somebody.
Right. I don't know if coffee's really ever affected me to that degree. I know that I get hyper. I get very hyper. I don't necessarily get really optimistic, but I could see where somebody that caffeine affects them in that way, that everything's great and everything's awesome and we can achieve anything. And you could really, you know, sign up for a lot more obligations than your body can actually accomplish in your workplace or in your relationships. I could see where that would be a real issue. And then I guess the converse of that would be if you drink too much alcohol. And I grew up in the South, and everybody knows that if there's too much alcohol with a bunch of people from the South, all they have to listen for is, hey, y'all watch this. And then I think that's when optimism steps over the line of foolishness, because people who are inebriated from the alcohol tend to do things that they think that they can do and they really can't.
Right. Because the alcohol numbs the part of your brain that says, maybe you shouldn't do that. Or maybe this situation is not something you want to get involved in. But when you drink a lot of alcohol, it's cool. You just go do what you want.
Yeah. Maybe you shouldn't put that gasoline inside there and then drop the match in. Just saying. You know, I'm optimistic that it won't burn the house down. Odds are it will. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So you've got kind of both ends of the spectrum. You have optimism based on high caffeinated people, and then you have it on highly alcohol induced people. And so, you know, again, it's when you start impairing your brain or putting your brain on different chemicals that alters your thought process. You should always strive to be in control of your thoughts, if at all possible. Like, you can't control your thoughts when you're asleep, but if you're wide awake and if you're in a business setting, or if you're with your friends or family, you should always strive to be in control, because you never know what kind of damage or trouble you can get into. Just a little piece of advice from me.
There you go. You know, when we ignore the dangers that are obvious in situations, and alcohol will do that. If there's a danger there and you're still being optimistic about the situation and whatever circumstances that you may be dealing with, and you're not seeing the dangers in it, you're not seeing the bottom side of this thing, and it's exactly like when you drink alcohol, because it numbs that part of your brain that says, maybe I shouldn't do this, or maybe I should really look into it a little deeper. And it's dangerous.
Right. And it's that specific situation when you're in a city that you may or may not be familiar and you decide to walk home late at night. And I'm not saying that the city is unsafe. I'm not saying that you shouldn't walk home. Just be smart about it. You know, if you're super optimistic that everything's going to be fine, that's great. But there's people out there who like to do harm and threaten other people. That's unfortunately a fact of our current society. So just be smart about the dangers and be aware. You know, and that leads me into the next thing. You know, optimism can be a real problem when you fail to see all sides of a circumstance or a relationship.
Oh yeah.
So when you're confident that you're in a good place and everything's going to be fine, and you're ignoring, like Lou said, those things that are obvious to other people, and you don't really take the time to step back and look at all of the circumstances surrounding a situation or even a relationship, you're setting yourself up for a tremendous
or potential tremendous failure.
That's true. Better said, a tremendous potential failure.
Because it could happen. Bad things can happen and do happen. And you don't want to be a victim of that circumstance or that relationship. So just, we're not saying don't do anything that's the least bit risky, but we are saying is to be careful. Make sure that you understand that you're optimistic about this subject, and then start looking for what could be danger.
Yeah, and if you know that you're predisposed to be super highly optimistic about everything, or if you've had way too much coffee or alcohol and there could be a lapse of judgment, all we're saying is just be aware and make the best judgment call. And we'll get into that a little bit more in just a second, but that's what we're saying, because I don't want anyone to be scared to walk down the streets at night. I don't want anyone to be scared of stopping on the side of the road and helping somebody. You shouldn't live your life that way. That's not living life. You know, whatever's going to happen is going to happen, but we want to make sure that you're at least making a wise choice in what you get yourself involved in. Is that a fair statement?
That's exactly right. I totally agree with you.
Okay.
But we presented the good and the not so good about being optimistic. Now we want to try to apply some of this maybe to your daily life, and maybe we'll uncover something that helps you. How do we know what the appropriate level of optimism is for any given circumstance? Are we supposed to evaluate every single thing, every small, minute detail of the day? And it's not the way we're asking you to look at it. We're telling you, ask a few questions. Right. Is this issue at hand almost too good to be true?
Right.
Because most of the time it probably is.
Right. It's really just trying to employ some common sense.
Sure.
If someone presents you with an opportunity and you look at it and something in the back of your head starts screaming, this is almost too good to be true, and that optimism kicks in and you're really excited about it, there's a reason that someone is banging in the back of your head saying, this seems too good to be true. It probably is. Mm-hmm. But, you know, you might have just lucked into a great opportunity. You never know. But applying common sense can help you navigate those treacherous waters and avoid any negative situations or negative impact coming back on you. That's what you're trying to avoid.
Yeah. Another thing to ask yourself is this decision to be optimistic or to look at the bright side of this, is it based on thoughtful thinking or with yourself or maybe with a trusted individual? If it is, then you really should trust that person a lot before you listen to them on serious issues. You know, right. It's not like a stock tip to say, well, you know, they're going to revive the Edsel, so you better invest in this company.
Right. But that also dovetails into, you know, and I'm a man, I've done it, women have done it too, but men happen to be those ones. We're walking down the store aisle, we see that large screen TV, and we know that it would look perfect in our man cave. It's only $2,000. Surely we could figure out a way to pay for it. I mean, I've got a credit card, and and I'm optimistic that I can raise the money to pay that bill off before the end of the month comes. That's when optimism becomes a problem. And that's why we say you should give yourself 24 hours and sleep on it, because that'll give you the opportunity to process through that, to think it through logically, and not be caught up in the moment and let that optimism kick in and get you signed up for a $2,000 purchase that you may.
I think that optimism is responsible for about 90% of credit card debt or store credit debt. Because if we said, well, I don't have the money right now, but I'm expecting a big check from so-and-so, or I'm expecting this situation to happen, and I'll be able to pay that $2,000 off just like that. And it winds up becoming $35 a month for the next 100,000 months. It just continues to go. And that optimism sells a lot of credit cards.
That is
really
true.
Does.
Right.
Yeah.
And we could go into, that's a whole nother topic. That's a good blab session right there.
Yeah, it is.
Talking about how people prey on that. Marketers prey on that. And I come from a marketing background. We were taught to really kind of zero in on what the perfect life would be, the vacation, because I was working with a travel agency, what the perfect vacation would be like. And, we weren't taught to focus on money, because that's reality. We don't want to talk about reality. We want to talk about that dream, so that'd be a great blab someday.
Yeah. Would be.
Blab.
Or so, blog, either one.
So the one thing that we sort of touched on a second ago was, how are we supposed to really process through, are we being too optimistic? You have to ask yourself, is that decision that you're making based on someone else's recommendation? And it goes hand in hand with thinking it through, because we have to take some people's advice, professionals' advice, like accountants and stockbrokers and other people, lawyers, doctors. We have to take their advice. And I think when we were putting this together, I think we were really thinking about friends and associates. But it really is one of those things. We take a lot of people's recommendations into account, and that's where optimism can get us into trouble.
Sure. And it could be part of your personality too, John, because if your personality is such that you automatically see the good in every circumstance and in every individual actually too, if it's that way, that's not a bad thing. That makes you a nice person. It makes you someone who people will gravitate to. And it gives everybody a good impression of you. It's just that when you take that a little too far and you're blind to the things that you don't want to see.
Right. And that can be dangerous. But, from the other side, from the person that's in a relationship with you, that can also be very challenging. And I said that earlier, but making sure that you make wise decisions, common sense. We can't say that enough. Making sure that you're applying common sense. Because every decision that you make as being an overly optimistic person does have ripple effects on the people around you. So, because if you make a mistake, it could affect the people that you're married to or your family members. So just be cautious. And if you're married to someone who's overly optimistic, be graceful. They see the good in everything. And that's probably why they saw the good in you and married you. I'm just saying, give them some latitude.
All right. Well, if your personality is this way, then you have to answer. You have two ways to go with it. If you are this way, be aware of that aspect of your personality and apply some sober judgment. Remember the word sober. Judgment to your discussions or your decisions. That is how you control it. At least you're aware of what's happening. And you're aware, well, listen, I may tend to be too optimistic about this. So I'm just going to make sure that I don't jump the gun and do something that I'm going to regret later.
Right. And if the answer is no, you need to be aware of that aspect about yourself and try to find good and don't ignore the obvious.
Is there a difference between optimism, pessimism, and being naive?
Yes, the answer is a resounding yes for all three. And what I'd like to do is really dig into the definitions of what optimism, pessimism, and naivete are, And then I think once we do that, we'll be able to really see those differences, and then really be able to see how the inner workings of those three terms and personality traits have on our relationships. So optimism is defined as hopelessness and confident about the future and successful outcome of something, or in a philosophical context, the belief that this world is the best of all possible worlds. That sounds like the quintessential optimist.
Yeah,
right?
It does. Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead. You have something on that?
Okay. Not really. You're 100% right. It is hopefulness and confidence about the future.
Right.
And that's good to have in some regard, but again, everything has to be run through the filter of reasonability and possibility.
Right. And I think that what we're going to learn at the end of this is all things in moderation for the most part when it comes to this type of thing. So pessimism is that tendency to see the worst aspect of things, or believing that the worst will happen, or a lack of hope or confidence in the future. And philosophically, we believe that this world is as bad as it could be, and that evil will ultimately prevail over good.
Wow.
180 degrees opposite that one is.
Yes, it is.
So,
and that's bad.
Yes, that is bad. But I can see the tendency for some people, especially if you're not optimistic. I could see where you could fit into that. I tend to lean that way. I tend to be a little bit more pessimistic about certain things. I'm a weird mix. I'm a weird mix of optimism and pessimism, and it really depends. And it's like you said, sometimes it's maybe I've had too much coffee. I don't know. But early in the morning, I can be one way, and mid-afternoon, I could be another, and at night, I could be an entirely different way. So I think that it's not as cut and dry to say that this person is always optimistic or this person is always pessimistic. I think that we flow depending on what's going on in the day, what our circumstances are like.
That's a good way to put it, because it's like your emotions all day will do this roller coaster.
Right.
Up and down, up and down. And I don't mean, that you have some kind of mental disorder where it does that all the time and you react to it. I just mean that things make us happy, things make us unhappy on a regular basis. You're disappointed, you get aggravated at a red light when it lasts 5 minutes, things like that. And if you try to solve every one of those little blips, then you'll make yourself very unhappy. You'll make yourself sick eventually.
Right. And when you experience those highs and lows all the time, that's a definition of manic depressive, right? That's a different situation. Sorry. That's different, right?
It's a different situation than they call it bipolar. You're not at one pole the entire time. You're not at the other lower pole at the entire time. Right. We operate within a spectrum of reasonability, and it's about this thick, and you can see the sine wave going through it.
Right.
But when it goes like this, and then it goes all the way down to the end, then you've got something, you have a problem, and you need to, you might need to talk to somebody.
Right. But that's a different subject altogether.
Yeah. Altogether.
So the last nuance of our personalities when it comes to optimism and pessimism is called naivete, or being naive. Which is a person or an action that shows a lack of experience, wisdom, and judgment, or natural or unaffected or innocent. Being naive is not necessarily a bad thing if you're just innocent of any type of real world experience, negative. You've never had anything bad happen to you. So you just assume that everything's good, that you assume, and you're optimistic. But if you know that there's bad in the world and you still choose to do things independent of any rational wisdom or thought, then you're being naive.
That's right. It's dangerous, John, to be naive. People, I hear it all the time on people that that they're naive. People tend to think that they're stupid, because you've said things to them that would normally trigger a response that would be counter to whatever it is that you said, and they don't do it, and you're going like, what is this person? What's it, just a story with this person?
Right.
And the answer is they're not stupid. They're just naive. They're just not ready for somebody who's being dishonest or who's being, manipulative in the background.
Right. I think that the definition makes perfect sense with experience, wisdom, and judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're lacking any of those three things, experience is tough. Experience is hard to get. Sometimes it's really difficult when you're having to get some real world experience. It can be really hard if you've never had to deal with some of those situations. And Lou, you and I have dealt with it, from a musical sense.
Oh yeah.
We I can't speak for you, but I can speak from my experience of being a musician in the real world. We have people come out of college and they've got degrees, and I'm not knocking the degree, so hear me out. But they assume since they have a degree that they've already established themselves as a professional musician. They've never really played a lot of gigs, but they've done the book work, they've done all of the performances within the college setting, and now they're leashed upon the free world. And they don't really have the connections, they don't really have the subtle nuances of being a professional musician. But the assumption is because they have a piece of paper that they've achieved it. That is lack of experience. And so you have to pay your dues. And if you're fresh out of college or you're fresh out of high school, you have to earn those experiences. And they're sometimes very hard.
Sure.
It's not easy to get experience sometimes. It takes a long time, but it's invaluable because it could teach you so much more than you can learn in any book or in any podcast or blog post. So I'm a big fan of experience. Wisdom and judgment. How do you get more wisdom? Comes from experience. So you have to go through that process of learning. And I think there's a lot of people who are very optimistic about life that haven't really lived enough life to where their judgments are skewed. We could sit and talk about that. Until you've been mugged, it's really hard to look at people like that. But once you've been mugged, it's really easy to assume some negative things.
Yep, it is. I've been mugged twice when I used to live in New York City. It wasn't fun, and it made me not want to leave my house. I was young, but still I remember it to this day, and I'm not quite as young anymore. So it does affect you throughout your life when these things happen. But your point about school is good. It's a really good one, because when you get a degree, all you've done is gotten yourself a license to do whatever it is that you need to do, especially in music, but in other categories as well. You get out, that doesn't mean much, except for you can get a job, get a halfway decent salary, hopefully. And then you start learning how to be what it is that you want to be. And in music, if you don't do the woodshed, you don't go back there and practice and learn how to do the things and play with musicians, you're not going to be able to make it, because you're going to look green.
Right. Yeah. And in anything that you do, I mean, doctors, lawyers, people in ministry, every area of life, you have to get those experience points, and it takes a lot of time. I have a friend who's a mechanic, and he would tell me horror stories of when he started out being a mechanic. And he rolled up fresh out of school, and he has a brand new set of tools, and he rolled in there thinking he was going to make a ton of money. And all he did was change oil for, I think he said, 6 months. Every car that would come in that needed an oil change, that's all he'd do. And all he did was shadow people, because he didn't learn enough about the subtle nuances of all the different engines and all the different requirements of being a full-time mechanic. And that is independent of running a business. And so he had to learn a lot. And it took him, he said he's about 3 or 4 years to where he really felt like he knew enough to, he said it was a difference between when he walked in on his first day, and it took him about 3 years to where he felt like he'd earned the ability to walk in. And then he hired a guy, did the exact same thing. He just laughed at him and made him change oil for 6 months. But that's not to say that getting a college degree is bad. We're not saying that at all. We're big fans of education, continuing education, all that stuff. But the experience that you can get is going to redefine that optimism that you have. It's going to give it some wisdom, and it's going to give you the ability to judge situations to where I'm super optimistic about people, but at the same time, I want to be wise enough to make good choices and smart choices to not only protect myself, to protect my company, to protect my reputation, and to protect the people around me.
Well, how should we live then, John?
That's a great question.
Let's apply it to people so they could understand what the heck we're trying to talk about here.
Right.
How should we live? We should strive to hold a positive outlook.
Yes.
But in complete awareness of the entire world, so that we are neither too optimistic or too pessimistic, but not slipping into being naive. The naive is your enemy most of the time.
Right.
It may be attractive to some people, but it will serve you no purpose to be naive. It means you're uninformed. It means you're not looking at things directly and realistically.
Right. And if you realize that you're being naive, if somebody points it out to you, or you find yourself in a situation, you really come to the realization that I'm just being a naive newbie. That's okay, because you can learn. You can teach yourself. Other people can help you. You can get all sorts of wisdom from books and mentors and coaches and counselors. You can always grow. You can grow your wisdom. You can grow your ability to judge situations.
That pretty much says it all.
Right.
We wrapped it up, and we're trying to help you with this. And if you should need some maybe one-on-one time with one of us, or both of us for that matter, please, contact us. We're available. We're not hiding anywhere. We're everywhere to be found. John on johncdonahue.com, and myself at lifecarecounseling.net.
Right. Well, if we missed something, or maybe you have a comment that you would like to take one of our points and discuss it a little further, you can always send us an email at you can always send us an email at questions@reallifepodcast.com. You can shoot us a message over on Facebook at facebook.com/reallifepodcast, or on Twitter, and 140 characters or less, at reallifecast. And we would love to hear from you. And you can always find us over on our website, reallifepodcast.com. And if you do come to our website, Lou, what should they do if they come over and visit us there?
I would sign up for our mailing list, because we have a newsletter that goes out weekly, and a lot of that information will be good for somebody to sort of get them on the right footing for the day or for the week. Or you can send us an email at questions@reallifepodcast.com.
Right. Absolutely. The other thing we want to invite you to is every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern time, we do a live blab. Now, if you're not familiar, blab.im is a social platform that allows people to come in and watch us. We talk for about 20 minutes, and then we open it up, and we have people that can come on and talk to us with their webcam. They can ask us questions in our chat room. And it's a great way to connect with us and other people around the world. So each week we talk about different subjects. Love you to be a part of it. 3 p.m. at blab.im. You can find us by searching for Real Life Podcast. As always, we want to thank you for watching or listening. Lou, thank you for your wisdom.
Of course, John. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And we want to remind you to choose to be awesome this week, and encourage you by saying, if you're searching for real help, real hope, and real life, you can always find it here at the Real Life Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Real Life Podcast. Find out more information and sign up for the Real Life Podcast newsletter at reallifepodcast.com. You can also learn more about our hosts, Lou Carfisi at lifecarecounseling.net and John Donahue at johncdonahue.com. And remember, live your life to the fullest. And as always, we want to encourage you to choose to be awesome, because when you choose to be awesome, you will be. Have a great week, everyone.